Hello, innovators. I'm Todd Wyant, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Great Tech Group. This episode was recorded live from Autodesk University in Nashville, Tennessee, where the brightest minds in construction, design, and technology came together to shape the future. Over the course of AU, we talked with industry leaders, innovators, and the change makers about the trends, tools, and ideas driving digital transformation in our great industry. So settle in as we explore how to model the future of construction innovation. Enjoy the conversation. Welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Great Tech Group. We are coming live from Autodesk University here in Nashville, Tennessee, and I am excited to be joined by Lalith Subramanian. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us and chat.
Absolutely
ACC
delighted
here
to do this.
So I want to start with kind of your journey into the construction industry, how you got here, and your role at Autodesk for our listeners here.
My brief journey into construction, right? Outside of sheetrocking at home or something like that, it's been a brief journey. So I've been with Autodesk 2.5 years now. And prior to that, I've had a couple of decades of working in a variety of SaaS businesses around everything from cybersecurity to AI applied to cybersecurity, e-discovery, document management, and even recently at DocuSign as well. So a bunch of different roles, but nothing close to construction. Few different vertical solutions in legal and manufacturing and pharmaceuticals, but never construction. So it's been an exciting journey, honestly, for me.
Yeah, I bet. What's that learning curve been like to, feel the full spectrum of the AEC industry?
It's been fascinating because, again, coming in new into this, I'm like a kid with wide open eyes, right? And I love visiting sites. I love going into architects' offices and really discovering how this all comes to be, everything that's around us. So I ask the most silly questions and try to learn. So I say, how did this crane get here? How is this built? How did this thing make it through this road? That's those kinds of questions, and sort of seek to understand how the whole project construction lifecycle works. So it's been a fascinating journey. That's pretty much dive in the deep end and just kind of go through and learn, ask questions and learn. That's what happened.
I love that. That's one of my favorite things about this podcast is my background is not construction either. And coming into the industry, I get to just pick people's brains and be like, all right, tell me about that. Well, why are you doing it that way? It's interesting. Tell me more. And it's a great learning curve because people are going to, they really appreciate when you say, hey, I don't know this. Why are you doing that?
Yeah, but then they give me this blank look as well saying, gee, you don't know that? And I trust you for my software.
So how was your experience on the SaaS side? How has that kind of influenced your work now at Autodesk, and how has that been helpful coming in?
It's been fascinating because for the last 15 years or something, I've done, and in fact, my entire career, I've not done one bit of desktop software, nothing whatsoever. So I always took it for granted that everything was sort of in the cloud and delivered in a SaaS model and all of that. And so coming to Autodesk and seeing the depth of tools that we have in design, truly come to understand what is the difference. Why do you need these desktop applications? The compute requirements, the graphics and visualization requirements, and why you need that, but at the same time, where they're not adequate to solve some of the more complex problems like construction. So where does the cloud fit in? And then trying to bridge these two worlds. That's been a very, very, very interesting journey for me, at least. Learning the desktop side and then trying to map that to what else do you need to make it all work.
Yeah, very cool. So the big announcement today with ACC coming into Forma and bringing it into that cloud environment. What excites you most about the big news?
The biggest thing that's the thing that's most interesting about it is that if you're trying to bring something like a vertical industry together, you have a whole lot of participants in this ecosystem, right? Like I said, I've done it before with pharmaceuticals and other places. So it's never one company that does it all. There's a manufacturer, there's a research lab, there's someone else who does that. Similarly, in construction, there are a whole lot of participants, right? There's a GC, there's the owner, there's the subcontractors, there's the field workers, all kinds of contract labor and so on. So unless they're all able to share information in one place, how do you actually improve anything about that vertical industry, right? So it's a pretty fundamental problem. So when you talk about Forma coming together with ACC, that vision of bringing all of the data, all of the design data together with the construction and operations data together is actually delivering on the possibility for an industry like this to be truly transformed, right? That's what excites me about it.
That's cool. So what is having that end-to-end industry cloud Well, how does that change the way that projects are going to be delivered moving forward?
Yeah, I think if you look at it today, could the industry work without this? Absolutely. It's been working this way for 100 plus years, right? So it's always possible to move data from stage to stage or from tool to tool. You look at an architect, do they have to share data? No, they could print out something and deliver a 2D sheet set to someone else to get to the next stage. You want to do estimation? You could always take an Excel spreadsheet and list items and move it onto your spreadsheet to do your costing. So you could always work through those kinds of stages, but bringing it all together in one industry cloud means that you no longer have that friction of moving data from tool to tool or from person to person, which means, in my opinion, you also are able to eliminate errors to a large degree, particularly at the more impactful earlier stages of the project, right? When design gets to be an estimate to a bid, that's when errors can be very expensive. So if you're able to eliminate that, I think the world would be a better place and construction could improve its margins and ability to deliver on schedule.
Yeah. Yeah, very cool. So, one of the historical problems in the construction industry is that everything is very siloed off, and there's some contention maybe between the designers and the contractors and the ops. And so how does having this unified platform, how does that start busting down some of those silos that have been created?
Look, I mean, if I told you that I could bust it just by building software, you shouldn't buy software from me, right? So, I mean, reality is that it doesn't work that way because there's a business there and there's legal contracts, there's commitments, and there's accountability and all of that built into this, right? Into these current day processes. So I think it's the only way this will all work is if you can somehow slowly transition the industry towards that. And what I mean by that is that some of the processes like RFIs and submissions are in place because they map to legal or contractual agreements that are coming to play, and there are penalties, etc., associated with it. So the only way we're going to do anything with software to transform this is to be able to keep that trust while still being able to make it efficient, right? So for example, if I'm the owner and I need to share something with you as a GC or a sub, you may not want to come to my repository and access the data from there because you're going to say, hey, wait, I'm going to be held accountable. I want to actually have a copy of that data. So when I build the platform or we build the platform, we've got to make sure that we're able to accommodate that you can have a separate copy that's owned by you, but shared with me at the right point in time, the most accurate copy that needs to be shared with me, right? So those are the kinds of capabilities that we sort of build into so that we can actually accommodate this kind of a transition.
Interesting.
That makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that came up in a conversation earlier today that would be interesting to get your thoughts on is historically, people were very protective of their data, and this is my data, and they held on to it really closely. Some of the trend is that people are starting to see that, I can use the same data set. I don't have to hold on to it as tightly, and it can really help all of us if we collaborate on this data set. How do you see that trend moving? And do you think that's accurate, that people are starting to open up more on their...
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. But again, it's got to be taken with a pinch of salt, right? Because it's a question of, from a business standpoint, is it really proprietary IP or not? Right. So if you look at one way you can think about it, if you look at Toyota, for instance, car that they design, or if it's some other construction company and it's a factory that they design, the exact way that they design the factory in the most efficient, most profitable way for them might be highly proprietary of IP, right? The choice of materials, the simulation of energy consumptions, and so on and so forth. But that is something that they believe is proprietary and truly differentiated. But on the other hand, having their supply chain share some of that information so that they can efficiently supply things to them to operate a factory efficiently or to execute the construction project, that's not proprietary, right? So the selective sharing of information from stage to stage. And I think that's the kind of thing that we're trying to, again, provide as foundational capabilities and foremost. So when you look at Construction Cloud, we allow for something called Bridge, which allows you to selectively share information with different participants while still having your copy be a full fidelity copy for yourself. So those are the things we have to do.
How do people go about having those conversations internally to figure out this is shareable, this is not, this is we need to hold this back on the...
And that's an interesting thing because that again touches on where the rubber hits the road, and it depends on the negotiations and the balance of power in some respects, right?
Sure.
Because sometimes it's a very powerful owner or a GC who's got the power balance in their favor, and they're able to guide this. But in other cases, it's equal power, and then you have to actually share this. So I think changes depending on the scenarios. And again, our goal is to accommodate as many variations of them. For example, in Forma, to have a GC set up their own account and have licenses be granted to others who need to come there to access the data. But on the other hand, if you have someone else you need to share it with who says, no, I'm not going to do it that way, we also allow the copy to be bridged over to their account, right? So that's the kind of mechanism that we sort of built to accommodate for it.
Yeah, cool. So when I'm thinking data here, the AI component is also present of people, kind of looking at it like, this is my data. I don't really want to train the AI model. How does that go about you? You need the data for AI, but you might not want to use it to
I mean, I think so. Again, my past life has included a few AI stints in other industries as well. And so I think the way I look at it is that AI is one of those things that can mean anything to anyone, right? Literally, it does. So you could take base capabilities, right? Things that you and I would expect and not even think of as AI. For example, the way you take a photo on your phone and have something find out what plant it is or what car it is and give you all that cool information. Is that AI?
I would say
sort of it is, right?
Yeah.
But it's a base capability. There's nothing proprietary about what it does, in my opinion, at least. So there are going to be some kinds of base capabilities where you can apply AI to classify photographs, extract information, and make it searchable and so on. That's all base capabilities. And I think everyone's okay with using that and having that be available widely. I think where people draw more of a distinction is if it is something that they associate with their IP, then the question is, if it is my IP, okay, I'm good with you training your model, but will it be used only for me or to benefit my competitor as well? So those kinds of questions get into the picture about the dilution of their IP with other competitors and so on. And there we are definitely much more careful. We will be giving ways for customers to control their data and data usage as well, as we have been for a while now.
Yeah, very cool. So the State of Design and Make report that Autodesk pulls out, there was a really interesting stat that was in there that I'm going to read it. Okay, so optimism about AI has dipped from 80% to 68%. It's interesting because as the talk about AI comes up, I would have expected it to go up. Why do you think it had that 12% dip?
Does that always happen? There was some analyst who said there's a little bit of a trough of disillusionment, right? Because there's all the hype that goes through at the initial stages. And then people start saying, hey, wait, I asked this the question. This is not entirely complete or it's not entirely accurate. I have to double check this again. So they say, okay, let me temper my expectations. And I think that's all that's happening with it, nothing more. And again, it's a question of how we as an industry deal with this. And from my past life, I know that if you ever make the representation that you're accurate and you're 100% accurate and trustworthy and they find one single mistake, they'll never come back to you again, right? So the way we're approaching this is to think of this as saying, we acknowledge that we may not be perfect, but we're going to give you all the validating information. So if we're giving you an answer, we're going to tell you what the sources are so you can validate it yourself and put it up there that you have to validate it. And it's got to be AI assisting the ownership of the decision by a human, right? At least for now. Maybe sometime in the future it changes, but the accountability has got to be with the person who's making that decision or inference based on that knowledge. Right? If that makes sense.
Yeah. So the skepticism is more so coming from the kind of the maturing of expectations, trying to adjust to the current reality.
That's what I think it is.
They thought it was the magic button.
That's what I think it is. It's not like a magic button that makes all your questions go away or get answered. Right?
Yeah. So, but, in the keynote this morning from Andrew, some of that did look really cool in Magic Button. When they were chatting it out and doing the live demo, gutsy move. That was awesome. Really cool to see. How's that going to be a real game changer that you can just chat in and it updates the model in real time there?
Absolutely. But again, I mean, definitely it is going to be incredibly powerful, right? No question about that. But he showed you one instance and where the expectation goes from 80 to 68% is because it doesn't show everything that's possible and where mistakes might be made, right?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the maturing of the technology itself that has to happen. But you think about it, even if it made mistakes and it just sped up all of your other operations and you just had a chance to get your answers faster, would you use it? I'd say, heck yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's kind of the where we're at. And that was the sort of the process that Andrew was trying to demonstrate, right? That this is what it could be. Doesn't mean it's perfect, but you're going to get your answers faster for almost everything that you do.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think it's hitting on a best practice of the trust but verify
Trust
when
but
it comes
verify,
with
exactly.
AI, that it's going to create all these different options, which are amazing, but it still takes a human with a human creativity to go in there and be like, okay, yes, I see where you're going with this, but we need to tweak and model, even as they were doing on the stage in the live demo of like, this is good, but we need to move this wall over here and
Yeah,
update it.
and I think it's actually, I mean, to draw from another analogy, I think this is normal because humans are used to having many subjective decisions, right? Like a design is not entirely objective mathematical formulae, right? So my previous life, we had contract analytics software, which worked with lawyers to make them more efficient. Again, AI. But the thing is that if the lawyer detected a mistake and they knew that they had to go back and verify that, they never trusted it ever again, right? So you would never get past that point. And I think with design as well, and with the lawyers, they would never come back to it again unless they had a way of saying, we want you to apply these rules, which are acceptable conditions for us to incorporate into the contract, right? Similarly, I think that's what will happen even with designs, where you're going to have all kinds of designs be possible, but what's an acceptable design? What's my appropriate for my brand, for my choice of materials, for my supply chain? Those kinds of things are all going to be constraints that are then going to be layered in subsequently.
So how do people cut through the noise then to set expectations in a proper way?
I think it's it's a question of setting expectations appropriately. And I think even at this stage with AI, and again, I've seen this now over close to 10 years of AI evolution, we're still at the stage where it is trust but verify, right? And so if I were designing an AI powered anything today, and which is what we're doing, we still cite all the sources and we provide assistive information, right? Every single place that we do it, so that you always have all the reference information available to you, whether it's from a text and a spec or it's a model that it's answering questions on. All of that stuff is available to you so that you as a human have the ultimate choice, right? And I think that's the way you build trust in AI. There really is no other way, because if you assume trust and then you detect a mistake, you lose trust immediately, right? So you don't want to get to that point. We certainly don't want to get to that point in something that's so impactful like construction, where the cost of making a mistake is extremely bad.
Right. Very low margins.
Yeah, very low margins and accident, safety. There are big things that can happen. So you want to be always cautious about that, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
One of the cool things I think about building technologies is and setting it out in the world is seeing how people use it, because the provider has something in mind and they think that the workflow is going to go this way, and then you give it over to the customers and you're like, I didn't think about that workflow that they're able to do with that. Have you seen something like that with ACC and AI of a customer using it that's just like, oh, that's really impressive?
All the time. And I think you'd be surprised if I told you how long the AI construction assistant was in beta form. Over a year that it was in beta. Why? Because again, you cannot anticipate what they're going to ask that thing, and you don't know what answer it's going to put out there. You could be very certain about even the thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of queries that you've done. But if someone asks you a query, you've got to be fairly certain about, is it going to be, how accurate is it going to be, right? So that's why we were trying to do that with all the customer betas that we ran.
How do you get that customer feedback then of, oh, you're doing it this way, to keep it in that user-friendly mode that it makes it more accessible for people to actually implement and adopt it?
So we put it out there and then we allow the customers to provide direct feedback, thumbs up to the answer, thumbs down, or that sort of thing. And so that actually feeds into us going in the back and saying, okay, what was the question? What were the results we provided? Then have a human actually refine that. And that's the only way you're going to get that model to be better as the query diversity goes up, right? And that's what we did for a long, long time. And we do that with every one of our AI products right now. Each that you saw today is going through exactly the same phases.
Yeah, very cool. Well, what's a big takeaway from ACC coming into Forma that you want to make sure people really pay attention to?
Look, this is just a starting point, right? Better connection from design to pre-construction. From pre-construction, you get the data flowing to the cloud, to the project management process, and then over into operations. This is the beginning of nirvana, I'd say, right? Because you get the data together, get the design data together, fewer errors made. Overall, the project lifecycle works much more efficiently than any other way, right? That's how I see it. This is the starting point.
Yeah. So if it's a starting point, how do you see the AI and the tech really evolving over the short term, next 3 years, maybe?
Next 3 years, you're going to see once the data is coming together as it is with the former connected clients and the former industry cloud, you're going to start seeing the richness of the data expand beyond construction cloud related data, RFI submittals and change orders, things like that, into much more of the design data coming in a granular form, right? What that means is that we're going to be able to ask and answer or answer many more complicated questions and provide, if you think about it, the feedback loop, right? If you're in design mode, you've had past projects that have completed, and the installation of one HVAC unit on a rooftop has taken longer than you anticipated because you made a particular choice. Now, that's the kind of information that the design plus the construction information from the past can come together. So the next time the Revit designer is specing that out, you could pop up a message saying, the last time you did it, it took this much longer. Would you still want to select this? That is the kind of thing that would really, truly transform construction, right? You're bringing in all of these changes far earlier in the process where they're much more impactful than incur something like a increased labor and installation cost much later in the process. So I think that's why I call it a starting point for a true transformation.
Yeah. So in addition to the technology evolution, in order to kind of handle and support this change in really mindset and workflow, what needs to be done on the cultural or the organizational side to embrace this?
This is a great conversation we just had in the construction forum. And many of these are not technology barriers, right? Because the technology is kind of out there, but there are limitations or constraints in the business model of how construction companies operate, and also legal constraints like we talked about before with contractual commitments between architects and others and so on. So I think those barriers will change if each of the sites sees a benefit to this technology coming in. I think for us as a company, Autodesk, as well as others in construction, popping up and articulating the ROI that people can see, the different participants can see, is going to be super important. Because again, in my past, when we built an AI to improve the life of lawyers by saying, you're going to cut down your time to do a task, they said, no, I don't want to cut down the time because that's my billing time, right? So it's got to be articulated in their language for their purpose. And I think that is what we've got to really push for, is understanding what's the benefit to each participant in the ecosystem when we talk about form.
Yeah, I think that's massive. It's something that we talk a lot about on the show, is that you can't use the same talking points for every single stakeholder along the way when you're trying to roll out new technology, because they are not going to care about a benefit for somebody else if it's not going to, what's in it for me.
That's right. That's right. In fact, one of the architects that I met with in another international location was telling me, what are you going to give me to keep my architects employed? Because they're now billing per hour. So if they're doing less of this, then what are they going to bill for? So I think those are fundamental business questions that have to be answered by us.
Yeah. So how would you encourage leaders listening to this to take the next step? What's the action that they should take away from this?
I think, AI is transformative. So you just can't turn on your blinders and say, I'm not going to look at this. It is going to transform every aspect of most industries. Construction is no different. Design is no different. So to keep that open mind to thinking, what are the possibilities? But at the same time, keeping that human and business element in mind, saying, what is the value to each person in the ecosystem, and what do I need to do to change culturally and from a business and legal standpoint to truly make it stick? Because it's not about the technology alone, right? I think that's what I would encourage them to think. Think more expansively beyond your own line of sight.
Yeah, I agree. The technology is almost the easy part. It's dealing with the change management of people's workflow and their habits. That's much more complicated.
Yeah, exactly. And their jobs and all of that stuff.
Right? Right. Yeah, for sure. So as we start to kind of land the plane and wrapped up the conversation, a couple rapid fire questions for you. So we're in the Great Tech booth. The tagline for Great Tech is modeling the future. What does modeling the future, what does that kind of mean and look like to you?
To me, simple modeling the future is everyone's using BIM, and it's driving efficiency across the entire design and project construction and operation lifecycle, right? We're not there today. So if we can make that happen, the faster we can make that happen, the world would be a better place. That's how I think.
Nice. What does innovation mean to you?
Innovation means positive impact on an industry as fast as possible. So that's what it means to them. Simple as that. Not about technology or anything else like that. Be any technology, it could be a process change, something that's truly transformative to the industry rapidly and produces ROI. That's what it is.
Nice. How do people find out more information on all the new updates and cool things happening with ACC and Forma?
Tons of roadmap sessions. We've got 83 people from my team attending AU, just walking around. They're at the booths. Yeah, they're at the booths at a workshop showing early versions of all of the AI stuff I talked about as well. So definitely encourage everyone to pull someone aside or go to the booths and the sessions for sure.
Very cool. Well, final question for you. If I could give you all construction power, you could snap your fingers and innovate one thing in construction, what would you pick to innovate?
Wow. I'd say the legal side of it.
That's a complicated mess.
That is complicated. And it's really, truly not about tech. It's more about the legal constraints that exist. And I think if somebody like an Uber owner were able to transform this, the Veterans Administration did it with healthcare and sharing of patient records and things like that. So if somebody with sufficient power, and if I were the one, if I could transform that, that's what I would transform.
Yeah, that's a big one. I like that one. We're going to try to snap and see if that happens. But thanks so much for taking the time and joining the show today.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Todd.
And now it's time for my Todd takes from this episode. Unify the life cycle to remove friction. Bringing ACC into Forma isn't a feature drop. It's the foundation for an end-to-end industry cloud where design, pre-con, construction, and operations share the same living data. Less handoff friction means fewer earlier stage errors and better schedule and margin outcome. This is the starting line for true lifecycle transformation. Second take, share data and keep control. The silos won't disappear with software alone. Trust and contracts matter. The play is selective sharing. Let each party keep a full fidelity copy while securely syncing the right current data at the right time. Think bridge, not dump. That's how collaboration grows without sacrificing accountability. And finally, AI that assists with sources. AI expectations are maturing from magic button to trust but verify. The wins come from assistive AI that cites sources, accelerates answers, and leaves a final judgment with people. Leaders should tailor ROI by stakeholder, pair AI with cleared guardrails, and build the culture and workflows that make adoption stick. Thanks for listening to this episode. If you are interested in learning more, you can visit our sponsor, Great Tech Group, at ASTI.com for more information. You can listen to this podcast anytime by simply going to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, be sure to check out our website, bridgingthegappod.com. As always, I'm Todd Wyant, thanking you for joining the conversation to model the future on the Bridging the Gap podcast. Keep innovating.